Bisa di ini aja nggak?
Hidup yang lebih hidup banyak yang banyak Pak yang telat hidup.
Terus.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? Our session is about to begin. Please have a nice seat and thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Welcome to our webinar series organized by the School of Architecture, Planning and Policy Development, Institut Teknologi Bandung. This webinar theme is Coastal Resilience in Global Change, Exploring Key Planning Dimensions. Before we begin, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Juwita, and I'm honored to be your host for today's session. We are thrilled to have a distinguished speakers and participants from various fields joining us to share insights and ideas that will help us plan for resilient and sustainable coastal development. Before we start, here are a few reminders to ensure a smooth session. The first one is please mute your microphone throughout the webinar to minimize background noise. Next, we have an incredible lineup of speakers who will dive deeper into the planning dimension of coastal resilience. The first speaker is Dr. Eleanor Bruce from School of Geosciences, University of Sydney. The second speaker is Bapak Saut Aritua Hasiholan Sagala, ST, M.Sc, Ph.D. The third speaker is Ibu Yunie Nurhayati, ST, M.A, Ph.D. Each speaker will present for about 20 minutes, followed by a Q&A session at the end of all presentation. And if you have any questions for our speakers, feel free to use the chat box for the Q&A or the Q&A feature. We will address them during the Q&A session. This session is being recorded and the materials will be shared with all participants afterward. Ladies and gentlemen, before we begin with today's webinar, we are honored to have two distinguished speakers to deliver their remarks and officially open our session. First, we would like to invite Professor Insinyur Joko Santoso Abisuroso, Ph.D., the chairperson of the Regional and Rural Planning Research Group, to deliver his greetings.
Thank you very much, Ibu Juwita. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat siang. Good afternoon for all distinguished participants. First of all, I would like to thank Professor Sri Nurhayati, the Dean of the School of Architecture, Planning and Policy Development, ITB, who has allocated a very busy time to formally open this webinar. Right now, for an example, there are two events which must be opened by 15th, including this webinar. And then also, thank you very much, Professor Eleanor Bruce from the University of Sydney. Really appreciate Eleanor. Thank you for joining the webinar from Tasmania. Oh, sorry, from yeah. Actually, Eleanor is traveling from Sydney and now I'll be in Perth. Hopefully, we can have a collaborative project in the future. For example, just yesterday I got good news that proposal from my research center for Koneksi program Green and Australia was accepted for the grant. So yeah, just yesterday I got the news. Also, I would like to thank Dr. Wilmar Salim, who will become a moderator, and then also Dr. Saut Sagala, who is now is not joining in this room, but will deliver the speech. And then Dr. Yunie just finished from Australia, just fresh from the oven. And all the distinguished participants. There are two reasons we selected the topic of coastal resilience. First one is due to the coastal urban expansion has caused a very serious coastal ecosystem degradation. Just an example, currently government has planned to build so-called giant seawall along the north coast of Java. I think this kind of plan could seriously degrade our coastal ecosystem. So that is why we need to give serious attention on this plan by providing advice. And then the second, our research group currently is revising our research roadmap. One of the main revision is to strengthen our research focus on coastal and marine areas. I think that's for the opening introduction from me. I would like to ask Professor Nurhayati, the Dean of the school, to formally open this webinar. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Professor Joko Santoso Abisuroso. So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. It is my pleasure to welcome all of you here in our last webinar in this year, the fifth series of the Institute of Architecture, Planning and Policy Development, Institut Teknologi Bandung, and today we address an urgent topic as Pak Joko already mentioned, coastal resilience global change, exploring key planning dimension. This webinar actually started at 2020 during pandemic, as a response to the COVID-19 pandemic, and then until now, I think it's already 4 years, has grown into a valued platform for knowledge exchange. Each month, we conduct this webinar each month, and one of our 9 research group will lead a session. And today, the Regional and Rural Planning Research Group concludes our 2024 series. And thank you again very much for the chairperson of the research group, Professor Joko Santoso Abisuroso, and all of the members of the research group. We are also honored to host Dr. Eleanor Bruce from the University of Sydney. Thank you very much, Dr. Eleanor, for your willingness to participate. I think also in Indonesia or at ITB, I mean, we will conclude our semester tomorrow, and then start the holiday maybe for the student. And as Pak Joko said, that we have strong collaboration with the Australian University. I also remember I already mentioned also to the student that we from our school also get the funding from the connection, but for the student exchange, yeah, I mentioned to our class this morning. So I also hope that this collaboration with the University of Sydney, we also have started actually with the joint studio, and also Yunie has finished her study at the University of Sydney, and we hope that our collaboration with the University of Sydney will continue in the future. Yes, and also I would like to thank Dr. Yunie Nurhayati and Dr. Saut Sagala from our school, and also to Pak Wilmar Salim for moderating this session. I encourage all participants online or in person here to actively engage in this critical dialogue, and let us work together to advance sustainable and resilient coastal planning for the future. Thank you, and I wish you a productive session. I conclude my session and open this webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Nurhayati and Professor Joko Santoso Abisoroso, for your inspiring words and warm welcome. We deeply appreciate your continuous leadership and support for initiatives like this webinar series, which contribute significantly to addressing global challenges. Next, we would like to take a group photo to commemorate today's session. For on-site participants, please gather in front of the camera or designated area as directed by our event staff. And for online participants, kindly turn on your cameras if possible and ensure your name is displayed correctly on Zoom.
Oh, madep sana. Mas, atau dari sana? Oh.
Paling ke depan, ini Pak, pindah aja sih. Nggak atas. Oke. Oke, 1, 2, 3. Oke, sekali lagi 1, 2, 3. Sekali lagi 1, 2, 3. Oke, thank you.
Thank you everyone for your cooperation. And now let's move to the next agenda. Now we are ready to begin the main part for today's webinar. To guide us through the presentations and discussion, I'm pleased to introduce our moderator, Dr. Wilmar ST M.Reg.Dev Ph.D. Without further ado, I hand over the session to Pak Wilmar, and the floor is yours.
Yes. Do I need to use this? Yes, okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar series from our school, School of Architecture, Planning and Policy Development, the final webinar of the year, with the theme of coastal resilience in global change, exploring key planning dimensions. In this webinar, we aim to provide key insights to understanding the impact of global change on coastal environment and communities, exploring effective adaptation and mitigation strategies to enhance coastal resilience, and to strengthen capacity building efforts in coastal management with a focus on planning and implementation to support sustainable development. As mentioned by the MC before, today we will have 3 presentations, and I'm going to read the profile of each presenters here. The first one is Associate Professor Eleanor Bruce. Good afternoon, Eleanor. Can you hear me?
I can, thank you. Good afternoon.
Okay, so Professor Bruce is at the School of Geosciences, University of Sydney. where she specializes in understanding the dynamic response of coastal systems to climate variability. She investigates the physical impacts of climate stresses on coastal livelihoods. It involves studying the geographical dimensions of coupled human environment systems and underlying biophysical processes. She uses multiple exploratory tools, including spatial modeling, emergent remote sensing technologies, and in situ field observation to research key drivers of coastal change. Based in the School of Geosciences, University of Sydney, Eleanor has a UNESCO chair in marine science and is the co-director of University of Sydney Marine Studies Institute. The second presenter, Saut Sagala, are you with us already?
Yes, Pak, I am here, right behind you in the screen. Yes.
Professor at Institut Teknologi Bandung and a professional consultant for various topics, among others, disaster risk management, climate change adaptation, climate mitigation, adaptive social protection, social capital, and risk finance. Pak Saut has published over 30 peer-reviewed international journal articles out of total of 150 publications. He has been trained as an urban planner at the Institut of Teknologi Bandung, International Institute for Geosciences and Earth Observation, or ITC, University of Twente in Netherlands, and Kyoto University in Japan. And currently, Pak Saut is the Vice Director of Research Center for Disaster Mitigation at ITB, and affiliated with Climate Change Center of ITB, which is headed by Professor Joko Suroso. And then our third presenter, as mentioned before, fresh from the open, newly minted Ph.D, Ibu Yunie Nurhayati Rahmat. She completed her Ph.D at the School of Geosciences, University of Sydney. The thesis explores agrarian change in coastal Indonesia, focusing on how coastal households are increasingly integrated into global markets for marine commodities, such as blue swimming crab, shrimp, and seaweed. Guided by a political economy framework, her research draws on the rich intellectual tradition of agrarian change while intersecting with livelihoods approaches and global production networks theory. In Indonesia, Ibu Yunie is a lecturer in the Department of Urban and Regional Planning at Institut Teknologi Bandung, which is a member of the Rural and Regional Planning Research Group. She is also an active member of Sydney Southeast Asia Center and the Indonesia Council. So please welcome all of the three presenters today. Each of you will have 20 minutes to present. And I will remind you when your presentation already passed 15 minutes. I will remind you. Okay, without further ado, I would like to ask Professor Bruce to present from Australia. The screen is yours.
So I'm delighted to be here today, and I'd like to thank you for inviting me to participate in this really important discussion. I hope you can see my screen. Please let me know if you can't. Given we have a short amount of time, I just wanted to discuss very briefly the key issues that we encounter in managing and planning for coastal zones within globally and also in Australia. I want to talk briefly about the concept of integrated coastal zone management and whether that can help address, when we look at that framework, whether that can help address some of these issues. And very briefly, talk about a small amount of research that we've been doing in the South Pacific and how we've incorporated these integrated practices into our research and the impacts that that's had in low-lying coastal areas in the South Pacific. I have to say I've not had the pleasure of traveling to Indonesia and working in Indonesia, so it's really exciting for me to be involved in this discussion and learn a lot from the conversations that will come from this. So before I begin, I'd first like to acknowledge the traditional owners of Australia and recognise that their continuing connection to land, water and culture. The University of Sydney is actually on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I'm currently travelling, so I'm based in Perth in WA. So I also recognise the traditional owners of the land that I'm currently on, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation. So I am a coastal scientist and I have been doing this work for many years. And I think the thing that really draws me to coastal science and coastal management is that the coast is really, and this is a quote that from research that I read many years ago when I was an undergraduate student, but the reason the coast is fascinating is because it really represents the front line between a static socioeconomic constructs, so land tenure and planning issues and legal issues, and the realities of the dynamic physical coastal system. And it's these challenges that make coastal management and coastal science really fascinating. When you think about sort of provide the broader context of the problems that we face in managing these really complex and highly dynamic and very open environments, is that when you look at this, so this is the latest IPCC publication on that recognises climate impact drivers. And if you look at all these various different climate impact drivers, the areas in purple are the ones that were predicted or projected to increase, and the darker areas highlight areas that have high confidence to increase. And when you look at all these various different climate impact drivers, it's really the areas associated with coast and marine environments that stand out as a cluster. So relative sea level rise are projected to increase with a high level of confidence, coastal flooding, coastal erosion, marine heat waves, which has certainly been affecting areas in our Great Barrier Reef, but also along the West Australian coast. Almost 10 years ago now, were quite impacted. These ecosystems were impacted by extreme marine heat waves as well, and obviously ocean acidification. So when you think about coastal populations, over 2 billion people currently live in urbanized, low-lying coastal zones. And when we start to model this, so a lot of the research that I'm involved in looks at modeling the links between where people are and coastal livelihood security and climate stresses. It's estimated that over 190 million people currently occupy global land below the projected high-level tide lines for the next century. And this is under low carbon emissions, with over a billion people now occupying land that's less than 10 metres above current high tide lines. So that's a large proportion of the global population. And what I would like to emphasise here, though, is when you look at the different models, there is variability across the globe. So sea level, so this image here shows global sea level change since first instrumentation of measuring this from satellite data and altimetry data to last year. And you can see there the darker areas are almost 20 centimetres of change or increase in sea level, and it varies quite significantly globally. So some areas are more vulnerable or more exposed to sea level than others, or sea level rise than others. So just to really quickly highlight the key climate stresses on coastal areas. So heat waves are an obvious thing. We talk about terrestrial heat waves, but also marine heat waves. So changes to surface temperature that we can measure from satellite data. And this has all sorts of implications for ecosystems. Altered precipitation, not just the amount of rainfall and the intensity of rainfall, but where that actually, whether that's localized within coastal catchments, and if it is, the implications of that for mobilizing pollutants and sediments and changing sediment supply to those low coastal areas. So that can have all sorts of implications for habitats. Sea level rise is the often quoted climate stressor in coastal managers, but along with not just inundation and extreme or increase in flooding events in low-lying coastal areas, we also have to consider potential for things like saltwater incursion in our groundwater tables. So increased storm intensity, and I know that that is an issue in Indonesia, that may then restrict opportunities for small-scale fishers to go out into the ocean and harvest. In Australia, that increase in storm surge events associated often with high precipitation events has all sorts of implications, particularly in New South Wales coastline, for increased erosion and infrastructure damage. Then we have changes to sea surface temperatures, so ocean circulation and storminess. That has implications also for coral bleaching and other ecosystem responses. And then increased CO2, so ocean acidification and the physiological changes that we see in marine organisms. So we often discuss, and we're very aware of ocean acidification being a problem, but now researchers are also identifying specific implications for coastal areas. So where we might have actual coastal acidification that can affect the life cycle of shell-forming crustaceans and other species that local communities might be relying on for food sources. So what are the key problems for coastal management globally? I guess the main issue is that we have this very high concentration of human settlement. As I said before, large proportion of our population lives within a few kilometres of the coast, combined with heavy resource exploitation. So it's that really increase in expanding highly urbanised environments in these low-lying areas, confounded by the issues of sea level and increased storm events. So this concentration of human population, we then have finite resources, so that we're dealing with, when we're planning and managing for coastal environments, we're dealing with this conflicting use demands, and that's why in coastal management, and in particular nearshore or marine management, we often rely on spatial planning, so marine spatial planning, but also spatial and temporal constraints on what activities can be permitted in certain areas. So an example of the finite use of resources, and I think this is really relevant in Indonesia, is the high demand for, or high construction, driven by construction, or the high demand for, due to construction for sand and gravel, will then impact sediment supply to the coasts and delta areas. So from a geomorphic perspective, that can alter these really dynamic environments. And once you start shifting sediments around and you don't have that resupply of sediments, it can greatly modify the coastline. Then we have, in many coastal areas globally, this mix of different ownership structures. So public use of coastal areas versus, public use of ocean and nearshore environments versus often a mixture of private ownership and public ownership in our coastal areas. And that has all sorts of implications, certainly in Australia, with rights to access coastal areas and whether and who should actually be responsible for maintaining and funding the protection of these of coastlines. And then I guess the other big key problem when we're dealing with coastal management is the difficulties and the challenges in separating out from a scientific perspective the natural change, because we are talking about a really highly dynamic environment, from human-induced processes of change. So what is actually a natural process versus what is it that is exacerbated by human use and development. And then obviously in this very narrow strip of land, we have really critical ecosystem services. So things like mangrove systems in terms of their protective capacity for protecting against coastal erosion, flood events, clearly fisheries. A large proportion, I think it's almost 90% of fisheries, commercial fisheries, those species are reliant on coastal areas, at least at some stage of their life cycle. And then we have opportunities within these areas. So we often refer to these things as the three amigos: seagrass, mangroves, and salt marsh, as these ecosystems often considered to have a disproportionately high capacity to store and sequester carbon. So really important coastal ecosystems. Then we have, when you think about climate impacts, we often, particularly in coastal areas, we think about sea level rise, but the consequences of that on coastal flooding. So existing modelling, or previous modelling, has looked at estimating the number of people that are likely to be at risk of a 100-year coastal flood event over the next century. And you can see that there are certain areas globally that are at higher risk than others. And these graphs highlight, so the purple areas are areas of the IPCC regions that are already at early stages of risk. And then the orange circles are sort of further down, is almost 100 years away. But you can see there that there are certain IPCC regions within the globe or the world. And Southeast Asia fits into one of those high projected regions for increased flooding and impacts on population. So here at the University of Sydney, and certainly in Australia, but this is also a planning approach that's used quite widely in Europe and in Asia as well, is this concept of integrated coastal zone management. So the idea here is that with a strict definition, EU commissioned definition of integrated coastal management, considered as an approach that involves a fairly dynamic, multidisciplinary and iterative process to promote sustainable management of our coastal areas. And the idea is that it seeks to balance environmental and economic, social, cultural and recreational objectives within the limits, and I think this is really important, within the limits of natural dynamics. So the image here is of a beach in Sydney, northern Sydney. This is Narrabeen, which is where we've had a lot of coastal erosion impacting on very high value properties that has resulted in a significant property damage, and it's a really high energy beach. So the solution here was a private solution. So the house was actually privately funded this very lengthy and quite costly seawall. And then you can see that in the further distance of that image. Closer is an alternative approach for dealing with coastal erosion. And you can see there that you've got these rock boulders that actually absorb the energy, the wave energy, and perhaps is a more effective, more ecosystem friendly based approach to dealing with shoreline erosion. The seawall that you see in the distance is quite controversial, but it's a vertical wall that almost mimics the bow of a boat. So you can see the top of that wall protrudes out, and so it's reflecting the waves directly off that wall. And so what we're seeing already, and we take students out to the site to show them that there's increased erosion below underneath that wall. So the question is, although the residents may have contributed, they funded about 80% of the cost of that wall, and then local government contributed to about 20% of the cost. In the future, in 50 years' time, when that wall may start to need repair and start costing councils, who then is responsible for funding that? So that then goes back to the principles of integrated coastal management, which I'll talk about in a minute. So here in Australia, a lot of the coastal management councils are actually set up, or strategies are set up to consider the land-sea interface, or the catchment coastal marine continuum, if you like. So not considering the coast as this narrow strip of land between the terrestrial area and the sea, but actually considering management issues as far inland as the extent of a coastal catchment, and as far offshore as the extent of the continental shelf. So the idea of integrated coastal zone management is that it is coordinated in decision making, that it focuses on the entire ecosystem rather than individual compartments of coastal areas, and it develops long-term goals with, and again, broad consultation with interested groups. So that is the end game, I guess, or the end goal of integrated coastal zone management, but it's really challenged. And the background here is that traditionally, conventionally, certainly historically, there's been divergent evolution of ocean and coastal affairs. So when you think about ocean management, that's generally focused on processes associated with, or decisions associated with maritime boundaries, freedom of navigation, migratory species, versus the sorts of coastal management issues that relate to, or focused on issues relating to the land-sea interface. So the idea of integrated coastal zone management is to combine and consider all of these rather than sectorial or spatially separating out these environments. So there are various different goals of integrated coastal zone management. And I won't go through all of these because I realise we don't have a huge amount of time, but really ranging from achieving sustainable development to also promoting linkages between different sectoral coastal and ocean activities. And there's various different principles that they're based on. But what I really want to emphasize here is the core principles of integrated coastal zone management that informs then how we make decisions on planning in these environments. So that includes things like interrelationship and integration between the different issues and sectors, so environmental protection, development, but it also factors in things like inter and intra-generational equity. So the importance, and this photo here sort of highlights the need to be considering future generations in any planning decisions. So the idea that any decisions made now shouldn't preclude the opportunities for future generations. The right to develop, and this gets really controversial, particularly in Australia. So the basic right to life for all humans. So what does that mean for promoting and allowing for development right on the shoreline when we have issues of sea level rise and the need for setback limits to prevent erosion of coastal property and developments? The environmental safeguard principles. So the idea is that the prevention of harm through anticipatory measures. So coastal managers are also responsible for making sure that users of the coastal environment and people developing in these areas aren't going to be exposed to anticipated harm. So things like, so for coastal managers, they're actually, and local councils, they're actually responsible for ensuring the safety of people using beach environments. And then the precautionary principles. So in the lack of scientific certainty, we shouldn't really postpone action to avoid serious or irreversible environmental damage. Transparency.
We have 5 minutes left.
5 minutes? Okay. And the polluter pays principles. So who actually should be responsible for those costs? So when we think about the development of seawalls, which might be a great solution at the moment, who should actually be responsible for maintaining them? So I'll just finish off the last minute here, talking about some research that we did in the South Pacific. So we were working with communities in Viti Levu in Fiji, and we used research methods, including household interviews and causal loop diagrams, which were really a way to try and understand how local communities actually perceive the risks of climate stresses and the impacts of things like changes to water temperature and storm surge and coastal acidification on things like fish stocks, sea level rise. And then we looked at extensive household surveys so we could actually understand or get a better understanding of household income and different sources of income and how they related to each other and whether there was a gendered focus in this. We also developed a mapping system, so a way of using GIS and remote sensing to be
Sorry,
able to
Professor Bruce, I think we lost your audio. I'm not sure whether it's on your side or our side.
Not the problem here. I can hear Eleanor.
Oh, di sini. Di saya mah enggak.
Okay.
I
All
can
right.
hear.
Yeah.
So maybe in the room. That's in the room.
Would you like me to pause?
We try to fix. I think the connection in the room is disconnected. I can still see your presentation working, but not in our room. Just give us a minute. Thank you.
Recording in progress.
Can you hear me now?
Saya pakai eduroam nggak masalah. Ini pakai yang lokal sih. Iya, ini pakai yang ruang seminar.
Can hear you, Eleanor. I think they are still fixing that. I'm not in that. I'm also online, so I can hear you well. So I think we just wait from the organizer. Okay, yeah.
Okay, you're back.
Right. So can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay. So I'll just finish up in 1 minute. So this is, so from that research that we did in Fiji, we then worked on developing a mapping system using GIS and remote sensing to look at mapping all the agricultural activity in low-lying areas in Tonga and some of the offshore islands. And so that involved, the idea here was to build capacity for understanding the complexity of coastal landscape users and the stakeholders involved in these landscapes, And in Tonga, most of the land is divided into 8-hectare land parcels. And over a 1-year period, working really closely with the Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Fisheries, the entire kingdom of Tonga was mapped at that really granular level down to 8 hectares. So information in these coastal areas on what was planted, whether it's irrigated, whether it's impacted by things like saltwater incursion, how old the crops were, the crop rotation, and what was really important to look at the resilience of these agricultural communities to climate stresses is to understand crop diversity. So that was all mapped just weeks before the Tongatapu tsunami event. And that was then, this really detailed mapping platform was then used to look at, rapidly assess the impacts of that disaster, that coastal disaster event on agriculture. And you can see here, the orange areas, the areas that were flooded by the tsunami. And they could calculate exactly the number of crops, the age of the crops, and the direct impact on the agricultural activity. So very quickly, by using these sorts of technologies, we can assess the vulnerability or the impact of disasters, of climate-induced disasters. Well, in this case, it wasn't. It was a tsunami event impacted or triggered by a volcanic eruption. But you can see really quickly how these sorts of, I guess, really what I emphasize and end on here is potential for looking at opportunities for solutions that can assist in coastal management and the management of and supporting low-lying agricultural activities in low-lying coastal areas. The last point I will make is that I guess under these sort of the considerations for coastal management, we need to think about integrated planning, the catchment to coasts approach, opportunities for nature-based solutions. And I guess really what I want to emphasize here too, and certainly in Australia, we're having to do this, is the need to mainstream sea level rise in integrated coastal management. So the idea or the concept of accelerating the implementation of these sorts of adaptation measures. Thank you. And I apologize if any of the audio problems were at my end.
I'm sorry for the interruption, but thank you for keeping your presentation time sharp. So we will move to the next speaker, Saut and Sagala. The screen is yours.
Okay, let me try to. Okay, if I do like this, can you see my screen okay? In the room, then also online?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and I really enjoy the previous speaker, Eleanor, for giving the context of coastal integrated coastal management with a couple of, I would say, framework and also approaches that also apply here in Indonesia, because we have many islands as archipelago country. We have really a lot of things related to coastal area. I'm given the opportunity to speak about disaster resilience as my focus a lot on disaster, on climate change. I think it was also mentioned just a couple of slides ago by Eleanor about the Tonga tsunami. I also learned about it, and just recently there's also Vanuatu earthquake, right? I don't remember if there is any tsunami coming in, but the impact is also quite huge in terms of the impact of the earthquake. Now, talking about earthquake, Palu City, Indonesia, which I'm going to talk now, is about also a very important example of how a coastal city and also the surrounding districts within the province of Central Sulawesi being affected by coastal hazard. So including, of course, geological type of disasters such as tsunami, earthquake, but also other types of hydrometeorological disasters such as the impact of climate change and so on. And this work is actually the work from our PhD students, so Professor Joko and myself. It's also Professor Harkunti. We supervise a PhD student, Rizky, and she's coming up with this idea of bringing the disaster risk index as part of her PhD work. and I'm having the honor of presenting this work. Now, before we go further the details about all the content, but I would like to bring you to this picture that this is about 2 or 3 days, maybe 3 days, yeah, exactly 3 days after the tsunami that happened on the 28th September 2018. So it's already about 6 years ago, and you can imagine that actually this coastal area, there are many houses, also economic activities like shopping malls and many others. But in the face of disasters such as tsunami, earthquakes, and other things, it may happen. It may go very quickly. It may be swept away very quickly by any coastal hazard. So I think the very definition mentioned earlier by Eleanor, I think about the how coastal area would be very important, very strategic in terms of economy, in terms of the space, in terms of the meeting point between land and also the sea and also ocean, but it also has a threat or big threat to the communities. Hence, we need to understand about the resilience and how also to increase the capacity to deal with event like this. The details about what happened in Palu, in terms of location, geography, it's always fascinating. If we fly over to Palu and trying to approach the airport, the plane will bring us. It cannot do it very easy to land there because it is between very interesting, I would say, hilly areas, and it also has difficulty for also the pilots to maneuver. But in that sense, it's also showing how the location or the city is prone to very active Palu-Koro fault. And it also, of course, prone to, I think we discussed about tsunami and the urban flooding. And urban flooding, of course, is increasing a lot because of population, runoff, and also related to sea level rise. The 2018 earthquake and tsunami, the event that I mentioned, it was something that was by many experts already being warned to local government, even national government, to the community. But it happened in 2018, where with the impact of the tsunami, it really brought a lot of devastating damages to people there. And what is quite new, as the event also causing what is called liquefaction. So the context of Palu city, it is passed by Palu River, where around that there is swamp areas. So because of the event of the geological event, the earthquake, it shakes all of the water, the mud, the soil, and it creates what is so-called the event of liquefaction, causing a lot of many thousands of houses being damaged, being moved because of the earthquake, but also being mixed with all the water phenomenon. I don't have the video at the moment because of time, but I think you can find it and try to recall how big that event was. And I'm lucky to be one of planner being asked by the National Development Planning Agency at the time to also come there just quick after the the event to really witness very important, I would say, disaster events in Indonesia that really huge to be imagined, but it's real and something that we need to be prepared for. A lot of casualties, a lot of impact to many things, and what I would like to say that starting from this event, people start to understand new concept of different type of cascading disasters. Earthquake trigger tsunami, and then earthquake also trigger liquefaction. There are also some landslide and so on and so forth, which was not really within the conversations. And it also highlighted how our limitation in terms of mitigation capacities and so on. This just to give you another example of how this is one of the important bridge to connect different parts of the city there, just next to the coastal area, how the impact of the earthquake, and also because of the foundation that is quite weak due to it's located in the coastal area, it really damaged many infrastructures, including bridge like what is shown on the screen now. In this research, I think in the interest of time, I would like to discuss more about the research itself. So the context of this research is trying to formulate, or let's say to strengthen the disaster risk index there. So it's trying to bring in together how the impact of the disasters from the different type of disasters that happen, and also how to bring that into the context of spatial planning input later on. The basic concept of framework of resilience, I think there are a couple of reference for that, but there is a drop diagram which is quite famous that shows how from the Carter reference to show how the vulnerability and then resilience and risk in between, and there's also adaptive capacity that is important to be observed, and also from the Australian Natural Disaster Resilience Index to bring in also coping capacity, adaptive capacity, and this is where community capacity would be very important, because then we will see the differences across community, across households from their vulnerability point of view. This is a more complex framework, and this also shows the work from Rizky that I mentioned earlier, the context from hazard, and then risk, and how the social ecological system as the context, and also part of the system to bring in the capacity, and also connect with the what kind of reactive response and so on. If you bring that in the context of timeline, we can bring that from the pre-event or pre-disaster into during the event, and then post-disaster, and then also how it is being, from the short-term adaptation and long-term adaptation. And how the coping with the disaster is like high vulnerability and low resilience would be very important to be considered, and also will affect how people in the future will come up with their resilience. So we need to understand this context and bring that into, I would say, spatial perspective, because we will know where higher risk area or different type of risk will be found, and also how the entry point for the resilience may come, and also that can be from the spatial perspective as well. Now, this is another showing how this framework being shown here, from the sensitivity, capacity, and exposure as part of the vulnerability. It will be contributing to the resilience as part of the adaptive capacity, and each of these, it has its own variables, from the individual, the social, like even social capital, networking, and so on and so forth. And then in terms of capacity and exposure, it may include the use of like interventions in spatial planning, such as zoning, the closer to the hazard, for example, or the further away, and then the relocation, the mitigation planning, the design standard, building codes, and so on, and including also how the stakeholders would be involved, and in terms of their economic strengthening and also monitoring. This is some details. I will not read all of this, but basically resilience is seen as the accumulation or the total aspects of life that play a role in reducing disastrous values, from dysfunction to showing from the adaptive capacity, the exposure, and so on and so forth. Now, from the resilience component of disastrous analysis, we did or we have been doing in the Palu is the analysis related to the integration with disaster risk reduction. So how the understanding about the risk and then coming up with what kind of measures to reduce the risk. In the context of Palu, after the tsunami 2018, they relocate some areas, particularly settlement areas, to further to the higher ground to avoid potential tsunami and also flooding in the futures. However, for some economic activity, it still remain there because that's source of income for the community, the local areas. There is challenges in terms of resilience because of the low implementation rates. I think we can discuss about, for example, the building codes later on that are still difficult. I was there also again this year, a couple of months ago in Palu, and you will notice that along the fault, the active fault, there are still some settlements that are located there. But if you notice to one of the location that is famous for the liquefaction impacted areas, such as in Balarua, you will notice that there is zoning there. That area now it's becoming open space for green space. So I think it's good because the government and also the community agreed to vacant that area to be used for now is let's say more for a green space and also to avoid for potential disasters in the future, such as liquefaction, because that's something that is very difficult to deal with or to handle. From the context of disaster risk analysis, the hazard, we have the information from the Geological Agency, also from the Geophysics and Meteorological Agency, and there is some mapping related to that. There are some also microzonations, and then the exposures would be all the elements at risk, like this type of land use, which are categorized into the residential buildings, public facilities, the economy and office buildings. What I mentioned earlier is the relocation for residential buildings took place, although if you notice in some of the more dense area related to next to the coastal area, there are still some residential buildings that are there and also being used by the local community. Public social facilities already started to also to think about strengthening their capacity to deal with the potential earthquakes and so on. In terms of sensitivity, our student, we asked her, she conducted this kind of data analysis from the questionnaire recapitulation, and then scoring, bringing that into spatial data, and then all the way doing the buffering and also reclassification and also converting the data into polygon so that we can do some calculation. And this is the example of sensitivity components with connecting with the different type of use of along the coastal area, such as shown in this map. And then in terms of resilience, it shows later on what kind of coping capacity, adaptive capacity, and a spatial structural planning that has been done. I also would like to, yes?
You have 5 minutes left.
Oh yeah. I think a couple of slides after this. Thank you. This is just to also highlight one of the publications that based on the previous research that I did together with Professor Joko, using the concept what is called risk-based planning approach. And we informed this also to the local province and also the Palu city. so that this can be part of their way of doing the spatial planning and also development. In the context of long term for Indonesia, basically Indonesia also has the damage and loss assessment and also financial arrangement calculation, which are integrated to post-disaster assessment. And this also part of the previous master plan development, and also something that can contribute to spatial planning for disaster risk reduction. I'm going to skip this part. The missing link, I think still now the challenge is how to bring in this beautiful or good concept, as also shown by Eleanor earlier in the previous slides, how to bring that into the local government implementation. And for this, we think that data would be very important to have historical data, which include the validity and accuracy of the data, the analysis of disaster, and finally to bring that into the spatial planning component as part of the policy. There are some inconsistencies in terms of data. The data is still invalid, inappropriate map scales, and cross-sectoral disaster mitigation that is not provided, and so on and so forth. This just show you the final example of the spatial structure, the map of the disaster risk, and also how the spatial planning there in Palu. So you will see along these coastal areas like this, there is how exposure to infrastructure such as roads, bridges being affected by disaster, and therefore strengthening of such infrastructure would be very important, and including like this, like I mentioned before. And I think let me come to the conclusion. So finally, it's important to think about that program building resilience must go beyond the outline planning document. And Palu City and its coastal areas are still in the process of building resilience. And this can be a very important example for other cities also, coastal city in Indonesia and elsewhere. Recovery and return to normal conditions after a disaster really take time. So support, analysis, research would be very important. The current effort is on infrastructure mitigations. As I showed earlier, exposure to infrastructures would be very important, and retrofitting measures and building codes are very crucial. So because if we need to save the people during earthquake, we need to increase the capacity to deal with the potential disaster through the building codes. With this, I would like to end my presentation. Thank you very much for the time for sharing this research. Over to Dr. Wilmar.
Thank you, Saut, for keeping your presentation time sharp as well. Let's move on to the third final presenter, Ibu Yunie. Time is yours.
Thank you, Pak Wilmar, for the opportunity to present. Good afternoon, everyone. Today, I'd like to share one of the papers, a part of my PhD thesis, which is still currently under review. I wrote this with my supervisor, Jeff Nielsen, as part of my PhD School of Geosciences, University of Sydney. The paper examines how inclusions of smallholders into the global production networks has transformed their livelihoods in Indonesian coastal communities, with case study in South Sulawesi. So I'm going to take you to more like social and economic aspect of coastal dynamics. In coastal communities further north along the Makassar Strait, it's in Hankook Regency. So this is the regular morning in the village at the local jetty. Fishers every morning landed their catch as the trader waited at the jetty, offering cash for their catch. So the main species caught was blue swimmer crabs or rajungan. They also occasionally catch mud crabs, jack trefolis, grouper, and occasionally lobster. But mainly rajungan or blue swimmer crabs. So the crab are then processed into crab meat within the village, employing woman labor from the low-income families.
The crab is then pasteurized by the exporters in the capital city of Makassar, then exported to international markets, mainly to the US. I'm not going into the detail of how the canned crab meat are produced, but this graph to show you how the production of canned crab meat from Indonesia involves multiple and multi-level actors located in different geographical locations in Indonesia, in other countries, and also involves actors both from industry and outside of industry, which together govern how the commodities are produced, how many and where these commodities are marketed. So Indonesia is the world's largest producer for rajungan or blue swimmer crabs, and currently US absorbs 85% of our production, with 25% goes to Japan and Europe and to China. However, although the global demand for the canned crab meat or daging rajungan is very strong, but the industry's growth are constrained by the declining crab stocks due to the unsustainable fishing practices. So the lead firms or the branded companies that are absorbing our blue swimmer crabs are mostly located in the US, such as Phillips Seafood, Eastern Fish, Chicken of the Sea. So Phillips Seafood is the world's largest company for the canned crab meat. They mostly source the blue swimmer crabs from Indonesia. They also have 2 processing facilities, one in South Sulawesi and one in East Java. The other companies, they don't have processing facilities in Indonesia, but they do govern how the production of the blue swimmer crabs canned crab meat are produced in Indonesia and Southeast Asia. So because US market is the main market for our blue swimming crabs, so their market fluctuations influence the livelihoods of the fishers directly. So in 2022, for example, when I did my field work, the fishers are not happy with the price they're receiving for the crab because it was almost half of the price of the previous years due to the oversupply in the US market, recession, the economic recession, etc. So they have been allocating more resources into the seaweed farming, which was currently on the rise because of the growing demand from China. So across the village, we observe almost every household, the fishing household, has dried seaweed in front of their yard. And it was common to come across a group of women, mostly 7 or 8 women, sitting under a stilt house, tying their seaweed seeding into the nylon ropes for the later cultivation of seaweed in the coastal sea space. So this is the tropical red seaweed. Indonesia is currently the largest producer of tropical red seaweed and second largest producer of seaweed in general after China. So the tropical red seaweed from Indonesia involves the least processing within the country. So it's quite straightforward from production to export because of the lack of processing technology and high cost of transportation. However, a few exporters, they did some processing and they produce processed product called semi-refined carrageenan for further use in as a thickener or stabilizing gel in numbers of products like ice cream, chocolate, yogurt, even in our shampoo, skincare. They all most of them containing the thickener or stabilizer from seaweed. It used to be something made of like chemical compound or from animal, but because of the raising awareness of people's awareness of sustainability and safety, they shifted more and more to more like vegetarian based products like seaweed, for example. So the red seaweed from our country, from like tropical countries like Indonesia, is mostly to produce something called carrageenan, which, as I explained, it's mostly as a part of this food processing, industries and also cosmetic and pharmaceuticals. However, although the industry is growing vastly and lots of emerging markets worldwide, The challenges remained because one of the challenges is because of the lack of processing technologies in Indonesia and also biosecurity risk from seaweed because of the lack food safety and quality assurance. The third commodity under studies is white-leg shrimp or little Panis paname, which is commonly found in many coastal Indonesia, and it is grown in traditional brackish-water aquaculture or ponds. So in the village, villagers typically grow white-leg shrimp together with milkfish and tilapia, while milkfish and tilapia are produced for local markets and for household consumption. Shrimp are mostly for export. So Indonesia is the fourth largest shrimp exporters in the world, and shrimp industries is more established and more competitive. The market is strong, the market is mature, and also the supply base is large. We are currently competing with like India, Vietnam, and Thailand, and they increasingly are more aware of the food safety, while our industry is currently still struggling to improve the food safety and disease outbreaks, especially for European markets. So shrimp involves lots of industries, different industries from hatcheries, feed, fertilizers, and processing technologies. So it involves more actors in the process, and we also have more like processing within the country. So lots of the shrimp exporters are processing the shrimp into the frozen products, and they export it to USA and Japan, for example. This is some of the major lead firms from the USA and Japan, influenced by their consumers' behavior. For example, Japanese companies, they require wide range of products, while the US companies, they require more specialized frozen products. So the livelihoods in the coastal village that I study are increasingly bound up to the integration of the global markets of these aquatic products. So that brings us to the question of how the dynamics of global markets have shaped and intertwined with the dynamics of smallholder livelihoods in this region. So in this paper, I use the global production network theory, which is defined as the organizational arrangement comprising interconnected firm and non-firm actors coordinated by a lead firm and produce goods and services across multiple geographical locations for worldwide markets. Within the GPN's theory, the concept of upgrading becomes pivotal to understand how increased integration into the GPNs, bringing regional development in the global south. So initially, upgrading is defined, or industrial upgrading is defined as the process of improving the ability of a firm or an economy to move to more profitable and or technologically sophisticated capital and skill-intensive economic niches. However, this definition quite limited to the firm engagement and not quite adequate to analyze the smallholders or small-scale producers' engagement in the global south. Industrial upgrading or economic upgrading, they often occurred alongside the exploitation of the labor. So all too often, when firms upgraded into more sophisticated production or high value-added activities, it brings exclusion or broader structural inequalities for the workers, like exploitation for women and women laborers and sometimes children. So in response to this, gap, there is a concept called social upgrading, which highlights how improvement of workers' rights and entitlement within the production net. However, in my thesis, I highlight that these concepts, both economic, industrial, or social upgrading, are not adequate for analyzing smallholders' engagement into the global production networks, because smallholders or like household producers, they do not operate like firms. they do not, their decision making are not solely profit oriented because they function as both capital and labor. They balance market relations. They produce commodity for their production, but they also produce commodities for market purpose. And so in this paper, we introduced the concept of livelihood upgrading, which is building on the work from Nielsen 2019. However, in that presentation, it was lacking, definition and also theoretically underdeveloped. So in this paper, we define livelihood upgrading as the process of enhancing access to livelihood resources and improving overall well-being for household producers through participation in global production networks. So we identify 4 livelihood upgrading pathways in South Sulawesi, which I will explain shortly. The first one is functional livelihood upgrading pathway. So functional livelihood upgrading pathway refers to the process where actors or producer moving up the chain. So in my study, for example, we observed at least 5 stream traders who initially engage in global production networks from as stream farmers, then move up into the local traders, then move up into the regional traders who supply exporters directly. We also observe similar process in crop processors. However, these process require new capabilities and knowledge, which often developed through relationships with buyers and markets, and often facilitated by relationship with downstream buyers or exporters. And so this process also shaped by prior access to a range of livelihood resources, such as land, financial, human, and social capitals. And these access to livelihood resources are shaped and mediated by local and regional institutions, often involving politics of access. So, and that's why these pathways are largely benefited the most affluent households, but it's not exclusively so, because we also observed a few households from low-income families successfully pursue this pathway and become regional traders or even processed. The second pathway is intersectoral livelihood upgrading pathways. This is to refer to the actors who use the skills and knowledge from one GPN to move to another GPN horizontally, usually as a commodity traders. So we observed this in 2012, 2014, for example, when global seaweed price was booming and a lot of stream and crop traders are moving to seaweed traders. So some households who have accumulated capital through commodity production or trading within the global production network, can be a stream or crabs, they use this to engage in or allow their children to engage in off-farm livelihoods. So, for example, stream traders usually send their children to school, to universities, and they become doctors, teachers. They open up transport providing company, for example. So the capitals or the values from the GPN, they channel it to other sectors and allow the children to diversify into non-agrarian or non-aquarian livelihoods. However, as in functional upgrading, intersectoral upgrading also require prior access to certain livelihood resources like land, sea space, or financial. And so it's also benefited affluent household. For example, here in the photo, this is the house of the one stream crop traders who have renovated their house, buying vehicles, and expanded their trading to from Sulawesi to Kalimantan and Papua. So the third one is the commodity suppliers livelihood pathway. So this is majority of the villagers. They do not have the sufficient capital to pursue both functional and intersectoral. So they maintain their function as commodity suppliers, but they manage to improve their livelihoods in a way. And they also often switch between different GPNs from shrimp to crab to seaweeds, depending on changing market conditions. So they're not locked in a particular GPNs, like what many lecturers see in the contract farming in India or Latin America, in potato, coffee. they often locked in into certain GPMs or lead firms. This is not the case in Sulawesi. So they channel their increased incomes into improved livelihood outcomes, like renovating the house, buying more like varied food, buying vehicles, and improve their children's education and their social status. The last pathway is the labor-based upgrading. That is referred to the process of livelihood improvement through participation as labor. The integration into the crab and shrimp and seaweed global production network has created labor opportunities in the village through the processing facilities. And this has providing opportunities for women, especially, and low-income families to participate into the global production networks. This is even pulling in many migrants and also villagers who have initially migrated to elsewhere. They come back to the village to participate in this blooming industry. So these households who pursue labor upgrading they improve their incomes and enhance livelihood by heightened financial access to their needs, carry boost and providing their children with pocket money and sending their children to primary schools. This pathway is often pursued by individuals with few livelihood alternatives, low-income families with no land or no access to sea space or insufficient capital to produce seaweed or crabs or shrimp. However, there's a risk of exploitation in these unregulated labor markets, but some more generally operating within kinship community-based relationships. However, in this paper, we do not suggest that upgrading is inevitable because some households experience livelihood downgrading characterized by increased precarity and vulnerability. So, for example, many poor households are dependent on coastal ecosystem for their livelihoods. They catch wild shrimp, or they depended on the wild commodities from the nature. But because of the global actors exploiting the resources to maximize their profits in the global production networks, these ecosystems are increasingly degraded. So it impacts these poor households who have no capitals to capitalize on these booming industries. So to conclude, my paper highlights how integration into global production network has transformed livelihood in the rural coastal Indonesia in the form of livelihood upgrading. However, not everyone have the access to upgrade their livelihoods because of the differential access to livelihood resources. So livelihood downgrading, for example, occurred because of the degradation of the coastal environments as a result from exploitation of the global actors. So yeah, that's for me. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Yunie, for a very concise presentation about the livelihood aspects of the coastal communities. So we have about 30 minutes for question and answers. I would like to ask if anybody in the room want to ask something to any of the three presenters. Persilakan.
I have questions.
Okay, so okay, wait. From the audience or from online, if you have any questions. Otherwise, Ibu Yunie will ask the question.
Not for me. Okay, I can help.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'd like to ask question to Eleanor and Saut. I'm interested in something you say about ocean acidification, Eleanor. So a lot of research that I read about seaweed also because seaweed cultivation has the potential to reduce ocean acidification because it absorbs nutrients, excess nutrients on sea. What I'm wondering is that you mentioned something about the carrying capacity of the oceans. How do we measure carrying capacity of the ocean, and what is the worst impact? So if we continue to let climate change impact the coastal or the coastal ecosystem, what's the worst thing that could happen if ocean acidification is going at the current rate without any intervention? Is there any possibilities that the ocean ecosystem itself is inherently resilient? So any changes or disturbance into the coastal ecosystem would be rehabilitated by itself, and perhaps there will be new species growing in the sea, because that happens in my case, for example, when sea cucumber are heavily exploited in last centuries, it's gone, but then new species coming like blue swimmer crabs and other species that are, so it's there are seasonalities inherent in the coastal ecosystem. To what extent, to what extent do we observe that climate change would heavily impacted coastal ecosystem without any intervention? Yeah, that's for Eleanor. My second question is to Pak Saut. Thank you for presentation. I'm curious about the model that you presented about the disaster. Also, question about how do you measure carrying capacity of the city to withstand such disaster, and include that into your.
Anybody else want to ask question here from the room? Okay. Silakan.
I'm Angela. I want to ask first to Ms. Eleanor. Before you explain more about role of a local community, but sorry, but our sound is being cut. So I just want you explain again about how the local community play in the implementations of integrated coastal management in Australia. And I want to know some key challenges maybe you have to face and how you overcome that problem. And for Ms. Yunie, yeah, I want to ask maybe your presentations, but I want to know more about government policy. Maybe what kind of government policy can interfere your process, or maybe global production networks, especially in Makassar. Thanks.
Thank you. I want to ask Ms. Yunie. You explain on.
Can you introduce yourself?
Okay. Yeah. My name is Ika. Yeah. I want us to Ms. Yunie. In your presentation, you explain about use marine research, focus on researching marine research. But I have a case that what if there are national projects national strategic project like port in coastal line. So community can catch fish in the coastal line. So they must go to out for the sea. Now, but in the case the community don't have boat proper boat, so they can dependency to the sea different from before. So what's your view? What your view about that case when people can have dependency to the sea in coast area?
Okay, I think it's we have three sets of questions now from Ibu Yunie, Baenda, and Icha. Yeah, so for
The
three
chat, I
presenters.
think there's question itu ibunya.
Okay, maybe we'll keep it to for three questions first. I would like to ask Eleanor to answer first. The two questions. The first one about ocean acidification from Yunie and then from Enda about the role of local community in integrated coastal zone management.
Thank you. Thanks for both questions. Both really important questions. So the first one relating to ocean acidification and impacts on species and ecosystem dynamics. Is that right, Yunie? So you're going back to the question, if I'm understanding this correctly, you're interested in understanding the impacts of ocean acidification on ecosystems and particular species. So, for example, with seaweed, these impacts are quite localized, and also the contribution that some of these ecosystems can have on reducing carbon and other forms of GHG emissions can be quite localized. Ocean acidification is not my expertise and coastal acidification, but certainly the main species that are impacted are shore-forming crustaceans, where that's relevant, so it can affect the whole ecosystem dynamics. If you're getting a reduction in say, macroinvertebrate fauna in the intertidal area. I'm not familiar with the foraging patterns of blue swimmer crabs, but say, for example, if acidification is going to reduce the population of macroinvertebrates, so what we find in the subsurface, so where you've got the sediments of the intertidal area and you see all the crab holes and evidence of all the macroinvertebrates, that might be worms or crustaceans. If those populations decline and they're an important feeding source for commercially viable species like the blue swimmer, then that's going to have implications. And there's actually very little research that's been done on the impacts of acidification on the food sources of some of these larger species, like blue swimmer crabs. In terms of seaweed, I'm not sure, and I guess this was actually a question for you, is how perhaps ocean temperatures, which might be a greater impact on some of these particular seaweed species, would be affected by ocean temperatures. That might actually have a greater effect than ocean acidification. So it's sort of, there's two components to it. One is the opportunity for some of these ecosystems to reduce and draw down carbon. The other is the impacts of acidification on these ecosystems and how it can change the function of those ecosystems. The other issue is that some of these shore-forming organisms are actually really important sediment contributors to sediment as well. So it can actually, down the track, we've been looking at research in the Pacific on the impacts of ocean acidification on sediment supply to things like coral atolls and other offshore islands or small islands. So there's it's a no easy answer because it's a really lengthy answer, but I hope that I've provided some insight in that. And I hope I interpreted your question correctly, but please correct me if I haven't.
Can you answer the second questions?
So the second question, yep, on the role of local communities in integrated coastal zone management in Australia, there is expectation that communities will be consulted in things like marine spatial planning, declaration of marine protected areas and other coastal management initiatives. So that sort of forms part of the transparency principle of integrated coastal zone management, that communities are aware of what's going on and involved in the decision-making process. How effective that is comes down to governance and politics. So another way that councils, local councils, coastal councils are trying to strengthen that community involvement is to establish things like citizen science programs as well. But mainly that is through the early release of draft proposals for coastal management plans or construction. So, for example, seawall construction, to get community feedback on proposals. So, for example, the seawall that I showed you at the very beginning of that presentation, that involved a really extensive community consultation process. It didn't necessarily include the consideration of all the community. Certainly the local Surfrider Association was very concerned about that development. There was a lot of protest from that stakeholder group. But at the end of the day, it comes down to the decision of the local council.
Okay, thank you, Eleanor. Now I would like to ask Saut to respond. There's a question from Yunie on how to measure carrying capacity. You can explain, elaborate.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I would like to highlight the concept of understanding risk, basically throughout this, and then I'd like to pick up also the question from Yunie to Eleanor earlier, because which I think it's quite relevant. If we are trying to understand how the context of carrying capacity, it may connect with the mitigation. You know, how certain measures can help to reduce the risk, but it comes to what I mentioned earlier about what is really the risk and understanding about the risk itself. So say in the context of Palu, we know that the city is prone to earthquake, tsunami, liquefactions, floodings, and so on. And different type of disasters will need different type of capacity to deal with. And that also includes what kind of carrying capacity. Disaster risk happens because it overloads the capacity itself, because of the exposures, because of the limitations. But it is already embedded within the concept of the vulnerability. Once it is, the vulnerability is higher, meaning it has also low capacity, the risk will become bigger. So such thing would need such analysis. And I think if I understand correctly, what is meant by carrying capacity in your questions would be the total understanding or the total carrying capacity. So while we can use like a mathematical approach to sum up all of this into like multi-hazard purpose, including also, which sometimes people forget, is also to think about what will happen in the future, bringing in climate change, like flooding that may happen 20 years from now or 30 years from now due to sea level rise, temperatures, and so on and so forth. So I think that's how I see it from the theory of the understanding risk and also the carrying capacity. Second, I would like to comment on the climate change impact to the coastal areas, communities, including like the households that you are facing in your research. I think temperature will be very important, that because it affects how species can can still grow within the boundaries or the certain changes. But we also can, if I use the concept of analyzing the risk, I would imagine of how the temperature increase would also affect some species, because the condition may differ from one species to another. The concept would be how to reduce the exposure, such exposure. For example, I can give a real case like from NTB, from West Nusa Tenggara, that some coastal areas, they have a fish pond, and to protect the salinity and so on, they also increase the protection along the fish pond. So I think the condition will differ from one place to another. I agree with Eleanor, it's the impact very localized, and what kind of risk reduction hence also will be very local as well. But we know also there is a global threat like climate change. Of course, there is a global pressure, but the interventions needed for certain cases may be very local as well. I think I will stop here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And then there's a question to Mbak Yunie, ya.
Indah ya.
Before I answer the question from Enda, I'd like to comment also on Eleanor's and Pascal's question and comment on temperature in coastal environments. For seaweed, for example, there are 3 different species that are currently grown in South Sulawesi, and their seasonality are depend on like their suitability on the coastal environments depends on pH and on temperature and waves. So it's not available, it's not suitable in all coastal areas in Indonesia. There are certain spatial and biophysical environments required to grow certain species of seaweed, including crabs and other species. So climate change and other disturbance or changes into the coastal environment does impact how these species are grown. For example, I think in the past few years, the seaweed harvests are increasingly become smaller. Shrimp are increasingly becomes high, like more mortal, like high mortality are increasing, and crabs are also become increasingly smaller. In addition to the unsustainable aquaculture and fishing practices, it does also, there are certain impacts from the climate change, the changing temperature in the oceans, the changing salinity. It does impact how these species are grown, and it impacts the livelihoods of the coastal communities itself. So, for example, coastal villages where they have access to the suitable environment for seaweed, they experience rapid transformation in their economic and social dynamics. But those who are not suitable for seaweed or for shrimp or for crabs, they remain like more not changing. In the past 10 years, there have been like a lot of transformation in these coastal areas with suitable production for certain species that are high demand from the global markets, but not those who are like not in demand from the global market or local species. And also to answer the question from Enda, there are a wide range of government policy I did not mention because of the time limitation. It encompassing, for example, the government policy and programs to reach or to improve access to the global markets for the exporters and traders. Government also has policy to ensure food safety, like certification, food hazards to exporters. Because in shrimp particularly, there have been cases where our shrimp has been declined by the importing countries from Europe and US because of the lack of food quality assurance, lack of food safety. So our government has increasingly monitoring and enforcing stringent regulations for food safety for marine commodities from Indonesia. Other policies that I think it's important from the government is that the redistribution policies within smallholders. So government has been supporting smallholders, fishers, fish farmers to improve their production, because in our national target, they have target of export, target of production, and it is manifested in more and more support for the smallholders, like providing them with boats, with nets, with fishers insurance, if you have heard of asuransi nelayan. So there are a range of policies to help these smallholders to become more integrated into the global markets in effort to improve their economy and regional development. Implementations, however, are fragmented. So there are some regional government who are more taking more initiatives, some regional government who are like not quite taking initiatives. So the impacts are not, the implementation and the impacts are not evenly distributed. The second question from Icha regarding the national strategic project and how different households have different access to the sea, is that correct? Some households are limited, have limited technologies or boats to access the sea. Yeah. Yes, it does happens in 2 villages that I understudy, and it is manifested in diversified livelihoods. So some household with access to the sea with like larger boats, more than 5 GT, they can fish to further offshore. So they can fish some more lucrative commodities like grouper, what is kakap? snapper, grouper. So those who have access, who have like more like sophisticated boat, they have access to financial capital, they can fish for more lucrative commodities, for more lucrative markets. But those with lower access to, like limited access to those financial and boats, they only can fish in shallow coastal waters. Some of them do not use boats at all. So they use these traditional fish traps made of bamboo, and they catch them, they catch wild shrimp, like reborn shrimp, the very small shrimp, in the coastal waters, very close to the shore, and sold it to the local markets. But because of the increasingly commodity-sized sea space for seaweed plots, so seaweed, so sea space is becoming like land, they're becoming property. So people have, claim sea space for their individual property. So access to the fishing grounds are increasingly restricted for poor households because sea space are now becoming property for the medium to, high income households. So that's one of the impacts of marginalize those who are already like poor and limited access to the sea space. Yeah.
Thank you, Yunie. I would like to read that there are a few questions on the Zoom chat here, one for each of the presenter. The first one from Lotte Hansler. For Ibu Yunie, I was wondering how you would construct livelihood of good ways that focus on improving environment that the people work in instead of focusing on specific life choices of smallholders. And then for Professor Bruce, thank you for your presentation. In the guiding principle, you mentioned about polluter pays. I'm interested in how this is enforced in practice, if you come across anything like that. And then the third one for Pak Saut, a very interesting presentation. Poro is a zone consisting more than one fault line. So we input all the fault line in the planning, and with consequences that most of the Palu area will be in high risk zone. Who wants to start answering first?
We are Eleanor first because I have it.
Okay. Professor Bruce, would you like to answer this question about the polluter pays principle in practice?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question, and it certainly has triggered a lot of debate, particularly with seawalls being constructed and funded by private owners, because in the longer term, and at the moment, they're not responsible for maintaining these structures, and potentially there's going to be considerable cost. If you can remember, I showed you that image where you've got erosion below the seawall of the beach, but also that feature at times prevents sediment accumulating. And so at certain times, people can't actually even access that part of the beach. So it sort of leaves the question open that in terms of the polluter pays principle. But a more tangible example that I can probably give you is, so there's the Australian Maritime Safety Authority, and they're actually under the prevention of pollution for ship spills or oil spills. They can actually detain a vessel in Australian waters that may be suspected of polluting in coastal territories of Australia. And those ships will actually be taken to court and may actually be detained. So that's an example, I guess, of polluter pays on, in open ocean. Along the coast, other issues or other examples might be where landholders, so property owners, may have constructed very ad hoc coastal erosion features like groins. I'm not sure what they're called in Indonesia, but where you've got these rock features that go perpendicular to the coast, and the idea there is that they then, so you're nodding your head. So I think am I using the correct term? Groins then trap sediment as it's moving up the beach or along the coast as a form of littoral drift. So sediment might accumulate on one coastal property owner's area at the loss of another coastal landholder. So people can construct these drawings unofficially without approval, and that does happen along certainly along the east coast of Australia. So then who actually is responsible for cleaning up those constructions if they don't have longevity? So they start to deteriorate over time and become not just an aesthetic issue for coastal users, but a hazard for potential coastal users. So that's, I guess, an example of the first one.
Thank you, Saut.
Yeah, thank you. That's a question from Iqbal, my former student, or and I put my response there just in case. But indeed, yes, we need to calculate the risk. We need to calculate if there is any, faults that are not being mapped yet, or keep it open. And I know I think around last week, Indonesian Earthquake Center, the Pusgen, just recently updated the map. So the previous one, it was released 2017, a year before the three earthquake in Lombok, in Palu, and a couple of places. So they are just updating that within the last 5-6 years. So I think we need to bring that. But it needs really capacity to do the mapping, because it needs some geological microzonations. And I think your institutions, Iqbal, will be very important to help in such things and use that information as inputs for doing the risk analysis. Yes, I think that's all. Yeah. Over, Pak.
Thank you, Lotte, for the question. So yeah, regarding the environmental improvement, there is a growing interest in a concept called environmental upgrading within the global production network theory, which refers to the process of how inclusion into the global production network can result in improvement in environmental or ecosystems. One of the strategies was increase certification, sustainability certifications among the firms or like large-scale vessels, to make sure that the species caught from the marine environments are caught in like responsible and sustainable manners. However, in my research, I do not find such cases. I find the opposite, that the inclusion into the global production network result in the degradation of the ecosystem because of the lack of the environmental governance, both from the state and from the industry actors. So that's why what I come up with the concept of livelihood downgrading, which is the outcome is that deterioration of the environmental or ecosystems can cause deterioration in the livelihoods of the coastal communities, because of the overexploitation of the GPN actors. But it needs, there may be some certain extent of livelihood environmental upgrading within the seaweed production, as I mentioned about the reducing ocean acidification or creating habitats for other species, for example, plants. So the seaweed ropes has become habitats for species like green clams in the oceans, and it becomes source of livelihood for some of the very poor households to catch clams within among the seaweed ropes. So, but it needs further research and to what extent such environmental upgrading occurred within the seaweed global production networks. I hope that answers the question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you to all presenters for your answers. Is there any other questions from the audience? Yes, please. Please introduce yourself.
My name is Ayesha, and I want to ask about how does participation in global production impact smallholder livelihoods, and also can you elaborate for the potential of livelihood downgrading? This is for Yunie. Thank you.
Sir, can you repeat the first question? Sorry.
How does participation in global production networks impact smallholder livelihoods?
Is Croatia is the same as the one that in
It's my friend.
okay. There's another question by Croatia in the Zoom chat about also Bu Yunie, yeah? Any trade-off between different livelihood upgrading strategies in terms of economic, social, and family impacts?
Thank you. I'd like to answer the first one from Ayesha. About the impact. So as I have presented, the impacts on smallholders are varied and multifaceted. So for some households, the impacts are positive. For some households, the impacts are more negative. So it largely depends on access to different livelihood resources. Those with more access to financial, human, and social capitals, they generally impacted more positively, but those with limited access, they generally impacted more negatively. But the impact is not quite that deterministic. I also would highlight the serendipitous outcome and the momentous I guess phenomenon of how these households are integrated into these booming industries, because some very poor households, they manage to pursue the functional upgrading, which is moving from like farmers or fisher into the more like bigger regional traders. When they engage in the production network within the timeline, when the industry was early, like in the early period of the booming, when competition are still lower, but they have access to the knowledge. So they have access to the knowledge of how the industry works. They have access to the markets. So although they don't have access to the financial capital, for example, when they can capitalize their social capital with the fishers, they can capitalize their relationship with the buyers, then they can move up to the more higher value added activities. So it's not always access to the financial capital, but also the moment, the right moment in where the industry was in early period of booming. It happens in both crabs and shrimp. The second question from Croatia, the trade-offs between different livelihood upgrading in terms of economic, social, and environmental impacts. It does have some trade-offs like I presented, although, for example, in functional, intersectional, I think in the 4 upgrading pathways, in terms of economic and social, they have positive upgrading, improvement, but the trade-off is with the environmental sustainability. So often when these households are upgraded economically or socially, it happens at the cost of the environmental deterioration. When both state, both government and industry actors are not implementing sustainability programs or environmental governance quite strictly, because it does not have to be that way. Like in other cases, in more developed nations, for example, in Indonesia, like I take Indonesia, but in different species like tuna. In tuna, environmental governance are more stringent, and they're more like there are more certification requirements. There are more programs and regulation from government for the vessel to catch tuna. So it happens at the minimum impact to the environmental degradation. But it happens after the tuna stock was declining very rapidly. So let's hope in crabs and seaweed and shrimp, we don't have to wait until it's declining to a certain level where it's probably not bounced back for the government and industry actor to start act on the sustainability program. We observed in my thesis, for example, in crab industry, blue swimmer crabs, lots of companies like Philips Seafood, Aquastar, Eastern Fish, they are starting to invest in more sustainability program, including in Indonesia through the cooperation with academicians and like NGOs to improve knowledge and environmental sustainability practices among the smallholders producer fishes. I hope that answered the question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Bu Yunie. It's actually after 3 o'clock now. Is there any more questions from the audience?
It's a quick question. for Miss Yunie. Just a quick question, Miss Yunie. I'm just wondering, do you find any involvement of a middleman actor in your market system? For example, that in the agricultural sector, we find like a tengkulak. The tengkulak, sometimes the farmer borrow the money and become the initial capital, and then they bond it in some way. And I've read some cases in marine commodity, we call it tauke. I don't know that the name is same with the Saut, Sulawesi. But what kind of product which you find don't get in the market system of marine commodity? Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Note. It feels like my defense. In Australia, it's not common to have like business defense. So thank you for the questions.
So you have the answer. You have the answer.
Yes. So the answer is yes. There are the middlemen of we call baku ikan. We also have pedagang. They call pedagang sawit, or traders. They have, I would say, a bit of mixed roles in terms of bridging the integration of smallholders into the global markets. At some points, they help these smallholders during the low season to finance their fishing operation, like providing them with loan to buy boats and fishing operation. But at the same time, they locked in this producer into their trading networks, and they sometimes offer lower price to those who have debts to them compared to those who are free. But interestingly, it does not happen in crab. So because of the high competition and low supply and declining crab stock, so the traders do not offer lower price for those fishers who have debt. So they offer the same price as those who don't have debt because of the lack of supply and the strong demand from the global market. So we still have like lots of gaps between demand and supply, and that's why the traders are offering more and more support for the fishers to go to the sea and catch more crabs, even the small baby crabs. So it's not good for the environment, but the industry are getting more lenient towards sustainability because of the growing market demands for crab meat. So they are now accepting smaller crab size. So yeah, there are important role of the middleman, but it can be both positive and negative.
Well, that question, I have a little answer also because one of my Ph.D. students completed research in Natuna, where there's existence of tauke, which is preferred by the fishermen than the government interventions. Yeah, so like not necessarily the government not necessarily understood well the business process of the fishermen in that area. Well, the tauke who used to be fishermen get bigger and then have more power and more resources financially, then they can offer better help for the fishermen instead of the government programs. Well, so this is 7:03 p.m. in Bandung now. I would like to close this session with several remarks. Professor Bruce began with a slide showing how the coastal areas is actually a sensitive area where there's a mix of socioeconomic and physical systems, and then follow up with some the concept of integrated coastal zone management, focusing on integrated objectives, planning instruments. And then the two presenters after that show examples of what is the dynamic physical system like what we have in Palu from Saut presentations, and then the socioeconomic system that works in South Sulawesi. So it happens that our work on the examples of physical aspect and socioeconomic aspects from Sulawesi. Yeah? So, and then with some guiding principles from Australia that we heard from Professor Bruce. And then,
Very Australian.
yes, Actually, most of actually. Joko also from Queensland. I also study in Queensland, so one of us has a Australian Sulawesi connection here. I did also my research in Maros and Baru area recently. Yeah. So thank you all for the presenters for your insightful presentation. Hopefully, it touches the theme of our webinar today, the coastal, how to increase coastal resilience, how to incorporate integrated coastal zone management, risk-based approach in planning, as well as sustainable livelihoods in our planning for the area. So I'd like to thank all of you for your participation. Those were questions. So listening for something participants online. I hope that you will enjoy our webinar today, and I would like to return to the MC, Mbak Juta. Thank you.
We are now approaching the end of our webinar. On behalf of Rural and Regional Research Group of SAPPK 15th, we would like to express our deepest gratitude to our speakers for their valuable insights and to all participants for your active engagement. I do apologize if there were some mistakes. We hope this session has been insightful and has sparked ideas for building coastal resilience in this era of global change. And don't forget, for all the participants, please fill out the participant attendance form. And thank you for your attendance. See you next session. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you. It's a great event. Thank you so much.
Thank
Terima kasih ya.
you.
Mari.